Now, continuing on with leadership, we now move to the RGA Leaders of Tomorrow program. And this is a program designed to support and motivate insurance professionals who have demonstrated executive leadership potential. And as you heard last night, participants get to work with senior executives as mentors to examine some strategic issues, explore opportunities for deeper engagement across core business functions, and expand global peer connections. And as one of the mentors, I've really enjoyed the opportunity to work with each of the mentees and as they develop their papers, and we have a very strong and deep conversation. But today, Arthur is going to take us through and present the winners of the RGA Leaders of Tomorrow program. Let's welcome them to the stage, please.
So Josh earlier was saying that he had a hard act to follow. But certainly this morning we've seen quite a few very esteemed leaders ahead of us, as well as the Deputy Prime Minister speak. But the one thing that I think permeates all those conversations was the concept of leadership and leaders of tomorrow. And in fact, we heard it from Deputy Prime Minister Wong, we've heard it from the last session as well. So I'm really thrilled to be here to be presenting to you the winners of the 2023 RGA Leaders of Tomorrow program. So let me just first introduce them very briefly, and then I'll speak a bit more about the program, and we'll dive into some questions. So to my left is Felicia She is the Chief Risk Officer for MSIG Asia. And then we have Joyce Liao, who is Internal Audit Manager for Milliman, based in Chicago. And then we have Joe Strathman, who is based in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and is the Director of Transformation at Transamerica. I will note that both Joyce and Joe had to travel very far to attend this session. In fact, Joe had like 40 plus hours of travel to get here, and he's leaving tonight. So that's dedication and that's commitment, and it's really important for us to be able to sort of hear their thoughts and voices this morning. But before I ask them specific questions, I did want to just reiterate the fact that this is a very critical program, I think, for the industry. At RGA, but also across the entire industry, we are constantly in a battle for talent, in a battle for that qualified talent. And through this program, I mean, I've got to know these three individuals quite well over the last few days. And to me, it's really fascinating to hear the stories, hear how they got here, and what their aspirations may be going forward. And the fact that if you look at their papers, they chose topics which are not just relevant to the industry, but also outside of their normal course of business. So they stepped out of their comfort zone, took on challenges, engaged with mentors like John and others that really took time out of their day-to-day work to help these leaders of tomorrow develop themselves and really expand their network, expand their opportunities to learn about the industry and develop themselves. So I would say I challenge the three that in 3 to 5 years' time, I'd like to see the three of them up here again, not as leaders of tomorrow, but as leaders of today at that time. So with that, I will say we're going to dive into some of the questions because we do want to hear from them. We do want to hear what they think about. And I do want to sort of thank also the IIS for working with RJ in this program, because it is something that we really feel very passionate about and are committed to. So first of all, I will start with Felicia. So her paper was on empathetic leadership. And I think it's been referenced, in fact, the last panel as well. And it's something that I think it's an interesting way to address the issue around how we develop more sort of gender-specific opportunities. So, Felicia, obviously you spoke about that, but what does leadership mean to you in that context, and how does empathy work into that?
Thanks a lot, Arthur. I guess, first of all, thank you very much. I'm really honored to be part of this program this year. It's been a great honor, really humbled to be chosen the winner. So I wanted to give a little bit of a background when I first started on this topic of mine. The personal topic of mine is on gender diversity, really trying to understand why there is not as high representation of women leadership in the insurance industry. Particularly, I think Swiss Re did a research in 2019 highlighting that, I think the insurance industry at the entry level, very female dominated, right? We've got about 57% female entry level. But as we grow up and, climb up the ladder, there's only about maybe 10% CEOs who are female and maybe 8% chairs of board. So something very close to my heart, and for those of you who know me, I've got a 4-year-old son now, and just trying to juggle between career and trying to juggle between how to manage my personal life, I thought, well, why not research on this really important topical subject? But what I wanted to highlight from this long journey of research, well, actually maybe the last few months of research, is that there are specific traits that I think may have been overlooked, whether it's a female trait or a male trait. In particular, there are 3 traits that I wanted to kind of share with everybody here today. So the first one is on risk aversion. It's been deemed as somebody's not bold enough. If we tie back to gender, it's always said that female make sure they're 100% ready for a job before they take that on. And then one really interesting line that I hear from Christine Lagarde, who's the managing director of IMF, she once said the financial crisis in 2008 may not have happened if it was called Lehman Sisters instead of Lehman Brothers. So joke aside, I think there is certain element of that risk aversion, and thinking about the insurance industry that we're in, right? We're in an industry of managing risk, in an industry of mitigating risk. So that trait, I think it's one key trait of a leader as well, to be able to balance between managing the risk, but also, of course, finding opportunities to take that on. So that's the first trait. The second trait that I came across was on agreeableness. So basically, female tend to be more, I don't know what's the right word, accommodating or tend to agree. But I think there's an element, again, especially in today's world, where it fosters a lot of openness. And I think one of the panels were talking about, being able to gather diverse background, diverse thought process. So having that openness does generate innovation and does help, again, bring out the best of each individual. But last but not least, which is actually the topic of my presentation, so empathy. So I came across that because I was, really thinking hard about what's really lacking, what do we really need to be in today's leadership position? And I think as we come out of COVID, mental well-being is very important, right? With people, saying that 2 out of 5 actually saw a decrease in their mental wealth. And I personally, as I gone through kind of COVID with my team, when we were all working remotely, it got me really thinking about these individuals who were sitting in their, in front of their desk at home. I need to be able to check in with them, make sure that connection is still there. So I believe in empathy as one of the traits that may have not been looked at as much. And I'm really glad that the previous panel brought that up. Empathetic leadership is really one of the key strengths, I think, in today's world, in navigating and understanding different perspectives. And my favorite quote from a lot of the research I've done is that people may not remember what you say, but they will always remember how you feel. So that, to me, is quite important, empathetic leadership.
Thank you, Felicia.
And if I may, I'd like to thank Felicia and commend her for choosing to focus on such an important topic that even the Nobel Prize Committee agrees, because this year's Nobel Prize for Economics went to Professor Claudia Goldin, who helped us understand what is the reason for the gender gap in the workplace. So thank you, Felicia.
Thank you.
So Joyce, you're back home. Joyce is originally from Singapore, so she's sort of back home, although she lives in the United States now. And we heard earlier as well from Deputy Prime Minister Wong around investments and sustainable investments, but her paper was around embracing sustainable investments. And there's quite a bit of debate around the pros and cons around that. But I wanted to hear from you as how you see that as the opportunities developing for that in the future.
Right. And so before I start, I do have a stutter. My pace of speech might be a bit slow, but I thank you for your patience. And so my paper focuses on the challenges and opportunities for insurers. And in it, I have identified 4 challenges, which are mixed financial returns, greenwashing, legal challenges from policymakers and politicians, and regulatory disincentives due to solvency requirements, for example. And throughout these 2 days, people who have been in the industry for a lot longer than I am have been discussing ways to overcome those challenges. But if I could take a slightly different perspective to talk about how to overcome that challenge, I like to look at it on a more aggregated, cohesive level. And that is for insurers to know yourselves, know what your investment objectives are, and know what your sustainability objectives are. And this would really help in overcoming even the more specific challenges. So, for example, when it comes to mixed financial returns, the tools are there to help with building portfolios that do help generate returns as well as to meet the sustainability objectives. But then it goes back to what then are your objectives. So knowing yourself is important. And looking at the topic of greenwashing, so in the last couple of days, we've talked about the importance of data. And greenwashing means that the data that we may be getting may not be reliable, it may not be the right type of data, but that is changing because, for example, in the EU, they've just passed the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and the US SEC is set to follow with disclosure guidelines around climate risk. So there will be good, meaningful, standardized disclosures coming in. The data is coming, but how are you going to analyze it and through what lens if you do not know your objectives? And through the objectives, you would know how to take the data, transform it into information that would drive reaction. And on the third point about the touchy topic of the legal challenges, I wrote about the exodus from the Net Zero Insurance Alliance. So, and that came about after a group of 23 US lawmakers sent a letter to the NZIA alleging antitrust actions. So despite the members leaving this particular organization, they have also committed to their sustainability objectives and they are continuing on that path. And lastly, to talk about regulatory disincentives, I think from DPM's speech today and our sessions yesterday, that is changing. And for example, the European Commission is looking at incorporating the sustainability risks into the own risk and solvency assessments. So the impact of sustainability factors on investments and the impact of investments on sustainability are mutually reinforcing and can't be separated. And so in summary, I would go with what the ancient philosophers would say, know thyself.
Thank you, Joyce. So Joe, we'll move to you next. Obviously, the need gap is something, the closing need gap is something that the industry has been speaking about for ages. And it's a challenge that we all face in different jurisdictions and different markets and different levels of how markets have also developed. You looked at it from the perspective of trying to maybe address certain groups that were in need of more attention, maybe more different ways to address the distribution. So please speak about your thoughts on how to sort of close that gap.
Sure. Well, first off, thank you, Arthur, and RGA for having us here today. It's an honor and honestly very humbling to be alongside my two colleagues here and Arthur. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today. So as Arthur mentioned, I looked at the need gap and closing the need gap within the life insurance market space. And when I look at where our industry has been over the previous years, decades, even centuries, you look at it and we focused on product. We focused on how to get that product to a customer. And it's a unique perspective in terms of how we look at it from a carrier perspective in selling our products. And one of the things that I first found when exploring my topic in my paper was how do we use technology to get our products in the hands? You know, there are some articles, some really good articles in 2017 and 2018 that focused on the idea that D2C was going to take over everything. And by 2025, D2C will be everywhere all the time. And there has been a blip. I mean, D2C really did show up, especially during the pandemic when you couldn't meet with an agent or advisor to purchase your life insurance. But one of the things that I really started to focus in on is what do the customers want? What is the experience that they want when buying a product? How do we as carriers meet their needs? Not just focusing on developing products and figuring out how to sell them, but trying to figure out what do the customers want and how do we align our products, our technology to those needs? And more importantly, how do we attack this from a distribution perspective? How do we identify the right distribution to reach these customers, particularly these underserved customers? In my research, I focused on the US market. Being from the United States, I focused on that market. But I think what I learned from the United States is really can be extrapolated across any market space that has unique, geographic areas that focus on ethnic, racial, religious diversity, and any other ways that you can really measure diversity. And when I started to look at this and explore what some of these different market segments needed in order to reach them as customers, we started to look at things like technology. How do we use technology to reach certain customers? Is language a barrier to reaching certain customers in market segments? And that's unique in the United States because we're starting to become a bilingual country. English was our primary language for many years. It's not an official language, but it's a primary language. But we've had a rise in Hispanic population over the last 2 decades. It's risen extremely, extremely quickly. Unlike European countries and most Asian countries, most Americans are not bilingual. Just fact of our education system, I guess. But one of the challenges that we have in reaching Hispanic customers, as an example, is most agents don't speak the language. Our marketing materials are not in the language of choice. We don't necessarily use the technology tools that those customers need. Likewise, when I look at Black Americans, they rely very much on narratives that are in the first person. What was your experience? Why did you need life insurance? How did your friend, how were they affected when they did not have life insurance? They really take first-person narratives very importantly when they're in the buying experience for life insurance. And so although we looked at technology and say, we're going to have these websites and portals and D2C and these aggregators and all these different mechanisms to distribute product, we really have to look at it in terms of how does the customer want to be reached? Do they need to be reached by technology? Do they need to be reached in their own language? Do they have more of a community in the sense of, do they have a religious or ethnic community that maybe there's an insurance agent who mirrors many of their different aspects of their life and they can relate to them? And when you can relate to a customer on many different levels, I think you're going to have a greater opportunity to engage that person as a customer, help them understand why insurance is important, because you're going to have narratives and first-person stories to help them understand. But ultimately, they're going to secure that insurance product that fits their needs. And so I think when we look at our industry, it was said yesterday, there's going to be multiple channels in order to reach customers. And I firmly believe that. I don't think that there's one aspect or one magic solution to reaching every customer. I think as carriers, we need to do a better job understanding our customers' needs. That's through research and talking with customers and understanding them. But more importantly, we have to recruit and educate and train our agents to work with these particular communities. And more importantly, if we can recruit agents and producers from these communities, I think we will have a better opportunity to penetrate these markets and serve customers who are traditionally underserved in the insurance space, the life insurance space in particular. And so I think there's a real value here when you look at the proposition from a carrier perspective. There is a significant opportunity to increase sales And as an industry, there's a significant opportunity for us to reduce the coverage need gap. And so I think it's going to take multiple tools to make that happen. I think it's going to take carriers identifying agencies and producer groups and brokerage firms that start to mirror the types of customers that exist out in the marketplace who are underserved. How can we recruit those brokerage firms? How can we recruit those agencies to sell our products? And finally, I think where this starts is at the home office, at the carrier. We need to do a better job recruiting talent, especially diverse talent. Females, people of color, people of different language, different religions. And I think that diversity will help us reach more markets and penetrate those markets much deeper than what we can today with what I would typically call the pale, stale, and male agent force that we have in the United States, which is old white males. We see a lot of that today, and a lot of those guys are retiring. And with these new generations being more diverse than what the previous generations were, I think this is a real opportune time for us as carriers to engage diversity at the home office to help us recruit that distribution to reach those customers who are truly in need.
Thank you, Joe. I mean, all I can say is wow. I mean, if you think about the ground that we just covered in the last few minutes, from empathetic leadership, sustainable investments, and then closing the gap. These are just 3 examples of the kinds of papers that we saw coming out of the Leaders of Tomorrow program. So there are 8 others that submitted papers as well, and they're available on the website. So I would encourage all of you to read them, because I think the perspectives that these Leaders of Tomorrow have shared with you today on their papers, on their topics is quite unique, and something that really, I think, sheds light on how we should be thinking about our futures as well. But let me maybe here just shift gears a little bit, and because we have this new generation with me today, to ask each one of them, what are the 2 to 3 maybe priorities that you see for the insurance industry going forward, and you'd like to sort of have the rest of the audience work on? So maybe we'll start with Joe on that end.
Yeah, I'll just build on my last topic.
Right.
Younger generations. That's going to be a significant change for us as an industry. Most of us, I think, that I look across the room over the last couple of days, middle age and older, mid-career and older, and that's totally fine. We all have our experiences. That's why we're here. We have knowledge and expertise. But what we can't necessarily relate to is some of the younger generations and how they do business differently, how they research product information and make purchasing decisions differently than what we have. I know when I purchased my life insurance policies, I sat down in a brokerage office with an agent. We went through the paper material and we wrote out the policy. Now you look at some of the younger generations, Gen Z, millennials, they're starting to grow up in a world where they've only known technology, but they're also not as financially savvy as some of the older generations. And so we have a bit of a disconnect here. I think we need to really focus on these younger generations, get them into our organizations, help them understand the business. We need to be able to reach out to them and understand how they need to be customers or how we can attract them as customers. And so I think that's a key priority for us, is understanding these younger generations so that way we can reach them using the technology tools, but also understanding how agents and producers play a role in that, because many of them don't have the financial literacy. So they might research something online to begin with, but ultimately many of them make a choice to seek out a human to close the deal. And that human may be over the phone, it may be over a web chat, that sort of thing. But we need to have multiple tools, multiple outlets for some of these younger generations to engage us as carriers, and for us as carriers to engage these customers.
Thanks, Joe. Joyce, any thoughts?
Right. So I would say two things. The first is, of course, sustainability. And to borrow a quote from one of the speakers yesterday, sustainability is a core function of insurance. And when you look at our cohort of these 11 papers, most of them are focused on one aspect of sustainability, and that speaks volumes, because we are a mini United Nations right here, but yet we coalesce around this one central theme. And more importantly, there has to be a sense of urgency in dealing with things such as climate action. So most recently, the BBC reported that we have an almost 70% chance of having a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in global temperatures within the next 5 years. So when you take that data point and you read the research paper that's from Swiss Re on the economics of climate change, and you think, okay, in 2050, what would be the level of global warming we have? Maybe 2.6 degrees Celsius if we are lucky, but that means that global GDP is projected to shrink by almost 14%. And right here in ASEAN, that number is almost a 30% shrinkage. So this really speaks to the urgency of needing to address this. And secondly, it's about communication. That's one of the priorities. So very much to Joe's point is about how do you reach your customers and communicate to them the risks that they will be facing. And to me, this is what I call the Cassandra effect. In Greek mythology, Cassandra is gifted with the gift of being able to foretell the future. But she is also cursed with not being able to communicate that properly, or that the recipients do not believe her. So there is a chance here for us as an industry to be able to look at ways to communicate that properly. And which is why I also draw inspiration from Mac, who was up here yesterday, where he was going into music for SDGs, cinema for SDGs, in order to make sure that things that need to be done urgently and that the message gets communicated through multiple avenues.
Thank you, Joyce. Felicia.
I guess from my standpoint, coming from a PNC or general insurance company, so just touching on what Joyce said, climate change is one of the biggest issues, a priority for us as a company. And I think DPM mentioned today, it's one of the topics that is also close to the MES heart. So from how I look at it, it's really how can insurance company work with our clients? Because he mentioned about 50% of the greenhouse gas emission comes from ASEAN, and I was actually quite shocked. So how do we then work with our customers to help them transition to renewable energies, to more sustainable products in the future? And I guess as insurance companies, again, we come from the mitigation of risk, managing of risk. How do we ensure we have a good understanding of what that means, right? Like what Joyce said, 1.5 degree increase. What does it mean to our portfolio that we write today? Are we, providing sufficient coverage to our customers? Are we providing sufficient coverage to ourselves as a company to make sure we're here for another decade or 100 years to go? So that to me would be the first topic. I think it's quite important. A second topic, which again, I guess, which is quite close to everybody's heart, is the cost of living. So in this macroeconomic environment, we've seen increasing in cost of inflation. I guess that really has impact to us from kind of the top all the way to the bottom. It means, operational cost is going to go up. We're going to have pressures and premiums. We're going to see claims costs go up. And then all the actions from the central bank in trying to address this through interest rate hikes does have an impact on our balance sheet as well. So really trying to balance that in understanding what it means really to navigate this period. The good thing is, like I said, in Asia, our inflation rate's probably not as high as the US or Europe, so we're slightly luckier, but still there is a need to really manage this important topic as we ride through this wave coming out from the high inflationary topic. And to add, these two topics are really, one of the top 10 emerging risks that was kind of highlighted in the 2023 Global Risk Report by the World Economic Forum. So really important priorities, I think, for the insurance industry as well.
No, it's all the comments that were just made clearly point to the fact that we as an industry need to remain resilient. We have a duty to provide accessible protection, accessible ways to protect their wealth, protect the well-being of everyone that we serve. And it's all the topics, all the priorities that you just mentioned, I think would resonate with everyone in this room. So with a few minutes left, I wanted to sort of also ask about your experience through the Leaders of Tomorrow program, because it is something, in fact, in the audience over the last 2 days, I've been approached by people that are alumni. We have, over something close to 80, I guess, alumni from this program in the past, many of whom are now our leaders. But given the fact that you've been through this program, maybe for the benefit of those in this room that maybe were thinking about becoming a mentor or to suggest mentees in the future, if you could just think about how you might want to share that experience and maybe talk a little bit about your own, how you got into the program and how the mentors made a difference. So I'll go this way again. So I'll start with you, Kelsey.
Start with me. How I got to this program? I guess Gary was, I guess, the honor as yours. So I got into this program because, as you mentioned, we've got alumni. So my CEO, Clemens, was part of this alumni in 2016, and he's obviously now our CEO. So there is great benefit in this program. And I personally, I guess how I look at it, the main thing I really got out of this is, and I was sharing with my fellow panelists and with yourself, Arthur, is that I wouldn't have, I guess, touched on this topic of gender diversity to that great depth if it wasn't for this program. I mean, it's been a topic that's very close to my heart, but with work, with a child coming along the way, it kind of sits behind. But I think this really gave me that opportunity to sit down and really go through this really important topic that is close to my heart. So I think that was the greatest benefit. And I think in terms of pairing up with a mentor, so what was really great was that I had a mentor who had, he's based in Hong Kong, so he's Asian. So we could relate in quite a lot of aspects when it comes to this whole topic of gender diversity. But what he gave me was different perspective because he's worked in the Western country and Asian, so he gave me that quite good balance. And I think one of the first few conversations we had, a question he asked me was, so what do you want to do with this topic that you're going to write? What sort of impact do you want to make from whatever topic you're choosing? And that really got me thinking about, and I'm sure with you guys, what sort of topic that's really close to your heart that's going to make an impact to the insurance industry going forward. And that to me was really quite a great benefit in itself.
Great, wonderful. Joyce?
Right. And for me, I hope that everyone at least once in their career gets to become a part of a mentorship program like this. And I have to thank Mr. Ken Mungan there from Milliman for nominating me to this program. So thank you, Ken. And my mentor, Carolina Gonzalez Martin Del Rio, she is from MedFree, and she's based in Spain. What I really appreciated was her bringing her international perspective to the topic of sustainability and sustainable investments. And I think what I also got from her was a huge dose of inspiration because both her and I, we have no actuarial background, so seeing her succeed was a huge inspiration. And she has also shared with me a Spanish saying that a single grain does not fill a barn, but it helps its peers, and together we can achieve objectives. And that theme, I hope, has come through in my research paper that is not an all or nothing approach on sustainable investments. You do have to know what you want, but you also have the option to select a variety of avenues to pursue sustainable investments. And my final favorite part of my interactions with her was hearing her share stories of the things that have gone wrong and how the insurers would step in to make things right. And as Mr. Gary Comerford would say, insurance is the noble profession. And I certainly got a good glimpse of that from her.
Joe?
Yeah, this was a really challenging program for me, but also very inspiring for me. So I was nominated by Transamerica, and I had Steve Walker from Protective Life as my mentor. And I started off with a very narrow topic, or what I thought was a very narrow topic, of how we're going to use technology to engage some of these customers, newer generations of customers, younger generations of customers. And that topic quickly ballooned, very, very quickly over my course of my first meeting with Steve. And in my second meeting, I got some questions from him, and I didn't get the answers, which I think was the best part. He asked some provocative questions that made me think, how do I align my topic of my research into something that can be formulated into a presentation, that can be formulated into a message that has meaning to its reader. And I went through several iterations. I think I changed topics at least 3 or 4 times. And throughout the course of the program, I think the one thing that really sticks out in my mind is no one's going to tell you no unless you ask. And what I mean by that is throughout this program, I got to meet executives and leaders and researchers from a variety of different carriers who are competitors of my own. And they were willing to share information with me and exchange information with me. We exchanged emails. We had multiple phone calls with some of these individuals. And that was the most unique and exciting part of the program for me is I had nobody telling me no, right? There's not a budget. There's not an annual target for premium that you had to collect. There was not an initiative that you had a certain date that you had to get it done by, although we had a due date for our paper. But there was nobody really there to tell you no. And so I just kept asking questions, which led to more questions, and I engaged people, and that engaged more people. And before you knew it, I was having to tell people, I can't take on anymore, because people were hearing the topic, and they were willing to come out and speak with me about how women in leadership positions, how younger generations of customers act, some of the challenges that we have with distribution, not knowing the language of their area. All these topics, you could probably write a paper about each one of these things. And all these topics are exciting. And so to really formulate this into a single research paper was a challenge for me. But I think that was the exciting part is no one told me no, and I had the ability to explore a variety of different people. And a lot of that started with my mentor who never said no. He also never gave me specific ideas. He just asked good questions that led me to ask and think on my own, to ask myself questions and ask some of the people that I engaged questions to really figure out, what could be meaningful in my research.
Thanks, Joe. Looks like we have some good questions from the audience, so I'll pass it to John to share some.
Thanks, Arthur. So as leaders of tomorrow, you have to manage up and down. Can you provide any advice to aspiring executives on how to balance this?
Who'd like to go first?
I can
Okay.
take that, I guess. I think it goes back to the theme of my paper, empathy. So being able to put yourself, your boss's shoes and your team's shoes is a really important trait that I've learned over time, because there usually are conflicting sometimes priorities, but being able to then understand both perspective, I think it's really important. And then you can actually, decide which one is, a priority and which one's not. And oftentimes, my boss is always, I need this yesterday. My team's like, I've got no time to do any more work. So really being able to put yourself in either of their shoes would really help to be able to, balance this aspect.
Your boss was here yesterday, but not today.
I know,
So
he's not here, right? So
Not in now.
keep it to myself.
either of you, any comments?
Right. So I joined Milliman during the COVID lockdowns. So I'm only about 3 years old to the company and to the industry. And one of the things that I learned when communicating during a COVID lockdown is to over-communicate. And so one of the things that I had to ask people to get to know them was, how would you like me to approach you? Would you like to email, chat, text, meet virtually? And through these communication channels, I got to know them personally. I got to know my boss and my peers personally. So it really does circle back to what Felicia's point on empathetic leadership is. You have to know the person you're working with.
Yeah, I think for me, I look at an organization from the top to the bottom, or from the bottom up, depending upon how you look at an organization. I think every single person in that organization has value. That's why they're there. And so from that frontline processor who might be pushing buttons to, make something happen, on a system to an executive who's making decisions about what products we're going to go into or investments we're going to go into. I think in order to manage both up and down, you have to really, to your point, have empathy and put yourself in the shoes of the person that you're working with. So if you're working with that frontline processor, you have to understand what's meaningful to them. What do they care about? What do they need to know? What do you need to know from them? You have that same conversation with an executive. It might just be that the topics are a little different, or maybe a little bit more concise or a little broader, depending upon which group you're talking with. But ultimately, I think you have to really have a good understanding from the, both ends of an organization to really be an effective leader in this day and age.
Thank you. No, I'm not an old white male, but I'm an old bald male. But
I can relate.
Even at my point, managing up and down is still a challenge. It's something that you have to sort of learn to deal with. And then no matter how senior you may get, there's always going to be someone you're going to be managing toward. It may not be a person, maybe shareholders, maybe something else, and to really lead a team. But I think we're just out of time. But I'd like to sort of have a big applause for this group. I think you can see that we're in good hands in the future with this group of leaders that will be leading us into the next 10, 20 years. All right. So thank you very much.